Okay, so we're going to talk about how to fix diversity gap in cybersecurity, which we know is kind of an issue right now. So we're going to kind of go through some agenda thing, but first we're going to talk about who am I, because you're probably wondering who I am. Some statistics, then we're going to go into some cognitive science, and then we're going to do a quick little activity, and then a little bit of storytelling, and then I promise that you'll walk away with some Q&A possibilities, but also 3 takeaways of what you can do in your own office. So first thing is, who am I? So since I was about 5 years old, I wanted to do something which encouraged equality, so I thought that was education with kids. And I still do that today. My background is I have a bachelor's in international relations, I have a master's in science and political research, and then I have 10 years of nonprofit experience before actually going into cybersecurity, so it gave me a very different feel of everything. I do sit on numerous different boards that are humanitarian, but majority of them are somehow related to kids' equality through education and health. I do mentor and give talks about how to break down barriers and walls. These are some of the students that I actually got to mentor recently at a conference back in UC Berkeley in June about trying to get them interested in cybersecurity. And then I also like to do blogging. I do have a nonprofit called Drop Labels, and I also had Now Cyber Ladies, which starts in January, which was actually started in Israel. And last but not least, I work at BugCrowd. Okay. So overall, women make only 11% in the cybersecurity force. This has been since 2013 and has remained unchanged. Minorities, on the other hand, is less than 12% make up the cybersecurity force. And we're looking at a 1.5 million shortage of cybersecurity professionals. And most likely, this is the worst part of it all, is that underrepresented persons are always the most likely to be let go or fired. So let's dive into some facts. But first, more companies are realizing that the only way to get great people is to invest in workforce diversity and social responsibility. Companies seeking to become more inclusive in their hiring should examine and question their own assumptions and unintentional biases in their hiring process. So I'm going to show you a quick video, and I want you to try to listen as much as possible without trying to think at the same time. I know that's tricky, but try.
I feel labels keep our society divided. A label that I've always felt held me back, or at least sometimes would bring me down, is because I'm an African American, I'm some kind of criminal. They see me as African American male, and they instantly get nervous. The wife will clutch their purse or their husband's arm a little more. They don't make it a point to be discreet while they're staring at my every move. And I know that I'm going to the class because I'm about to finish my master's, and I know I already have a bachelor's degree. Join me and many others in the Drop Labels campaign by posting your experiences with labels at droplabels.org.
So yeah, that was definitely a push to go check out my nonprofit. No, but on other notes is that this is another one of those moments where you're first thinking of like, okay, I just heard your story. Now the next thing you need to get to in life, which is very hard when thinking, is what am I doing that's causing this guy to have these issues still? And you might not even know that yet. You might not even think about that yet until maybe one of those days where you're in the elevator and you're finding yourself clutching your purse a little bit tighter, or believe it or not, when you're driving in an area, you decide, you know what, I feel like locking the car doors for a reason. So let's break down how that works in our brains. So first is we are afraid and we act on our fear. So how this works is in a part called the amygdala. It's where we're programmed to sort who is like us and who is not like us. And this occurs unconsciously. And at the same time, it could be something of a survival mechanism of our potential threats. And these tend to be stem from like our socially constructed beliefs and norms. Ever since, like, say you watch some movies or documentaries, or you have parents that said, don't hang out with the kid next door. And you're like, why? Because they have pink hair. Don't trust people with pink hair. Now you're always going to think about this later on in life unconsciously, that I will always be afraid of a person with pink hair. But the good news is that it's always verified. So in the frontal lobe, it actually perceives and checks in with the amygdala. So the amygdala is like, whoa, 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 be afraid, be afraid. The prefrontal cortex can actually turn around and be like, you know what? You need to chill. And let me tell you why you need to chill. And the reason for that is because, one, we just heard of a story of some guy saying, sometimes people clutch their purse a little bit tighter because of a stereotype that is false. The next thing that happens is that you're questioning the stereotype, this belief, and then you end up making the final decision. So think of the prefrontal cortex as the CEO. It makes the final call. And then last but not least, then it turns into action. The prefrontal cortex lets know what's the next step. So just note, overall, you can always question your own biases. And it's really okay to be uncomfortable. I know that's the worst thing ever, is to actually look at ourselves and see, like, what did I do wrong here? But at the same time, it's the way that we learn from each other. We get out of our comfort bubble with each other, and that's how we actually make changes happen. So we're going to do a quick activity. I want you to sit next to someone you don't really know. So, not quite yet. So, the first thing you're going to do is, this is going to be maybe uncomfortable for you, but I promise you, you're going to find a lot about yourself and your thinking, and also you're going to learn a lot about this new person you're sitting next to. So, what I want you to do is, someone say A, the other person says B to the other person. I agree, who's A and B? Let's just do that. All right, we've all sorted it out. Okay, so now the next step is, whoever said they're going to be A, you're going to talk for 5 minutes about anything you want. About anything you want. Now, person B, you're going to just listen. And now, anytime you catch yourself thinking, I want you to go back to, like, no, pay attention. Don't question. You can't ask anything. You have to let the person talk the whole entire time. You can nod your head, but you cannot talk. You cannot ask for further things. You have to just listen. Now I'm going to set the timer for 5 minutes. Ready, set, go.
we won't be ourselves to other people with this. And so it's wonder if I imagine it's kind of like what they would want the message I don't know, I saw Rocky get slide and staring at it.
No, they're doing an exercise. I got it.
How often did I first see her? I don't know. Complete crazy great house.
He's Brian.
Still have a little more. Don't have to destroy some things that come around. Parents had like 3 of them, or numbers of people. Oh, wow. Easy. Okay. It's not very short. Everyone watching our music.
There's one really
And the one that watches traveling. I like those. We've done a lot of it's done a fair amount of building on computers that are just building themselves. So you storage twice for a house and all that. But it figures works.
It is a company that's trying to do a lot of shit. There's a company that's way too much of this. You made it out like how it's
I know we don't mind.
They kind of broke out a little bit and see that.
Very so much.
Oh yeah. There's one
And stop. All right, so now you guys are going to switch. Now remember, you cannot respond, you cannot talk, and the other person is going to now talk for 5 minutes. Think about anything, and afterwards we'll do some quick review. But ready, set, and person B, begin. And time. Okay, so that must have been very awkward. Usually how it works is like the first 2 to 3 minutes, you're just like, well, if you're the first person speaking, you're like, oh my God, what am I going to talk about? And suddenly you go down like this rabbit hole where you start getting really serious very fast. You get really like, oh my God, I can't believe I just told a stranger this. Oh my God. And then the other person who's listening, it's always like the first few minutes, you're like, stop thinking. What do you want to ask? Oh yeah, I have that same too. Oh wait, what am I doing? No, pay attention, pay attention. And then you drift away like, oh God, here we do it again. What were some of the things that you guys felt? Or better yet, tell me, how did you feel about doing that exercise or that activity? Yeah? Right. What else? Yeah. Did we get really deep somehow at 4 minutes? A little too deep?
Would you have expected a different result when you had paired up across different sexes?
Ooh, that is a good question. Probably the conversation would be a bit different, right? Good. Okay. You can stay in your same seats if you like. It's up to you. All right. So there are not as many minority cybersecurity professionals in the community or in movies to depict those roles. The minority cybersecurity professionals that I know made a career switch to pursue technology after leaving the cybersecurity industry. Unfortunately, this is very much true. And the reason for that is that they're not being heard. They're not getting the titles they want. They're not getting the pay that they're supposed to be getting. So what ends up happening? They leave. So I'm going to tell a few stories of different people that I interviewed. So one is named Rebecca. Rebecca's a CISO. Rebecca has overheard the board several times saying, oh, she's not technical enough. No, we can't hire her because she's not that good at what she probably knows what to do because she's technically challenged. Even though a woman might be an engineer for a long time, has been in cybersecurity for like 10 years, somehow she's still not technical enough. Remy, who's a salesperson, complained about the bro culture at her company, and within a month she was let go. And the reason for that was that the bro culture started getting a little bit more and more intense, and they kept hiring more men instead of women. Which unfortunately she got laid off because of it. Di, who's in sales, she asked for a raise because she was her top sales performer for a few years. And what ended up happening was that when she went to talk to her manager's like, sorry, I cannot give you a raise because if I do, then everyone's going to think that I am trying to give to someone from the same race as I am. And she's Chinese American. He's Chinese American. So he said to her, I can't give you a raise because of that. But then he ended up giving a raise to a male colleague who underperformed her, who is also Chinese American. Cleo, who's in marketing, what happened was she started seeing a shift. She was at a company for a while. She was doing a lot of things for marketing. And what ended up happening, they kept hiring men on this team. So she ended up being the only woman, and she kept walking by meetings and lunches that ended up not having her included, even though she had the same title as them. But she also noticed that when she would go into their office or a meeting room, they would always say, hey, Cleo, can you dial in? Or Cleo, can you take down notes? Even though it wasn't her meeting to do that. Anthony, he's actually a designer, and believe it or not, in his company, they decided they want to throw a hip-hop party, where basically it had on the pamphlet itself, it's okay to have cornrows, to dress up, listen to rap and hip-hop music, and this is the same company that decided they didn't want to celebrate MLK Day off, that they could use their paid time off instead. Tanya, a security manager, she's been in this field for 20 years, and she left to go work for a tech company. And because she could not go past the title of manager, and she's African American, a woman, 20 years at a company that's very well known, and it's just unfortunate because she's someone who gives back so much to the community, and she can't even go past a manager title. Rita, a pen tester, she's actually applying for work. And the first thing she told me that I look at is to see who is on the board. If there's a woman on the board that is not HR, she will apply. If there isn't a woman, she's like, I do not want to climb up that hill. The other one is Frank. Frank is African American. He works for NATO for their security, and he told me he has never taken one day off. And the reason for that is because he's the only African American male in his team, and he's worried if he takes one day off, someone will say something and say that he's not doing a good job because he took a day off. So from stories, it changes our perspectives and beliefs. And also it can remove blindfolds, bring awareness, and overall, it can make us really uncomfortable because the best part about stories is when it questions yourself, what am I doing that's making this situation continuing? So how do we apply this to solve the gap? Well, one, you can speak up and push your company to have more diverse execs and board members. Sometimes that works. Sometimes it really doesn't. You can also do is start early to promote the field. So this was taken from a cybersecurity conference, which had a bunch of kids from East Bay to try to get them into cybersecurity. And this is one of my students that I got to mentor during that time. And he actually did a spoken word thing that you guys get to hear. If it works. Oh, here we go. So this kid right here, he's a wonderful, he's like one of those students that like he loves everything at all the times, but he can't focus on one thing in particular. And he's also kind of, quote unquote, his teachers will call him a troublemaker. But in reality, what he had was a rebellious streak. And what he liked to do was trying to figure out how to like break into classrooms and how to unlock things. Sounds like kind of like our culture a little bit here, right? So I connected him with a hacker, and now he's learning Python, believe it or not. And that's what he wants to do. So the other thing is you can attend conferences that empower underrepresented persons. It doesn't matter if it's Day of Security, which is like on my laptop. Yes, I know. Day of Security is a great conference. It was for a bunch of women. Over 200 women came to this conference, and it was wonderful. But also what we needed to see was more men. Even if it says, Day of Security, still come, still go, because it shows that you care about women being in the field, and women need to see that more than ever before. Also, there's other types of organizations that are doing conferences. You have the Diana. You also have, there's just so many, especially during DEF CON. There's like all these like little small ones, like Hacking Diversity is one of them. I highly recommend going to them. Also, get involved in outreach, participate in volunteering. Like those students that you saw on those pictures from East Oakland, you can actually get involved and push your company to get involved too. Now, remember when I said you can go up to your board, or you could go to the CEO or the C-levels or whatnot. Sometimes it's a little bit tricky, but you can go to your managers or get other people at your company to recruit them, come on board, and to do volunteering over the weekend, then post a bunch of photos on Slack. I swear to God, what ends up happening is the HR person will see them and be like, this is a good idea. We should be doing this more. Marketing is going to love it, because you're like, we got to do this more. People like people that like people. So, this is a great opportunity. Push your work to volunteer. There's Black Girls Code. There's Hidden Geniuses. There's tons of organizations. And if you don't know where to go and volunteer, come and let me know. I will let you know what organizations. Now, most importantly, though, I hope from the exercise and a little bit before diving into our brains and whatnot, but the start really does looking at yourself in the mirror. What am I doing here? How can I make things better? And also share the stories. The stories that you hear from other people, share that. Because stories are life-changing to a certain extent. So the 3 takeaways, like I promised, is personal stories are powerful. Push your company to increase their diverse talent by volunteering, sponsoring, and listening. In return, awareness can happen. And last but not least, allow yourself to become uncomfortable and vulnerable. And lastly, it is only with the heart that one can see rightly. What is essential is invisible to the eyes. Yes, as you probably noticed, a lot of the slides happen to have the little prints in it, because this happens to be my favorite book. I even love foxes, which you'll see on the next slide on the questions. Any questions?
What are the most common reactions you get from the exercise?
So a lot of the reactions is one, the person gets, if it's like right after my talk or whatnot, sometimes they'll message me saying, I'm really worried someone is going to share my story and I didn't want them to share that. And then I remind her that it's a safe space, but also her story probably is going to change someone else's story. That's one. The other thing is that they felt really, really uncomfortable and nervous for the first 2-3 minutes, but then they started realizing that somehow something kind of triggered where they felt more comfortable suddenly. Also, it brings 2 strangers really close really fast. That's the other things I usually hear. Any other questions? Yes.
This is going to be a fun one in some ways. If people thinking of this from there was a Evergreen talk by me, where they brought in the FBI's profiling, but it's a public school, so I don't think it's sensitive. So they just teachers and other people were present. So they basically, and this isn't sensitive in my view at all, hopefully, but FBI, basically they're profilers of cyber criminals, which is actually a very small group within the FBI. They brought up the concept of people have 3 sets of beliefs. One is this core set of beliefs they develop that's very young, they don't really express, but it's very hard to change. Then you have this more dynamic set that tends to persist for a few years or whatever, and can be potentially changed. And then you have this very dynamic set, which is especially your short-term memory and how you act in your immediate environment. And the guy was, at least in their case, they were considering from a criminal perspective and saying, yes, you have these hardened guys, it's in their core beliefs, therefore you just lock them up and throw away the key. From a criminal perspective,
Yeah.
I guess the FBI, their belief from that model, and reformation is not possible, theoretically.
Yeah.
So how does that kind of fall into diversity? Because I always kind of see diversity as kind of a multi-dimensional lava lamp where you can't really, you have a lot of things which of like different things in different velocities and buoyancies and whatever, where you're just looking kind of like averages. As a group, things may change, but
Yeah.
for older people, well, he jokes about how that's the way it always was. And
Right.
It's very hard, so you'll be gradually shift, but you're not going to. You're gonna have a lot of the issues like the Me Too movement where things happened years ago, which potentially may or may not have been acceptable in the time center, and now being judged under today's standards.
Yeah. Well, I mean, okay, so going to the Me Too movement really fast on that. Well, the thing is that even though it's gained more attention than ever before, I would say definitely with social media, the one thing for sure is that still prosecution in itself it hasn't really changed as much, and we have seen that now today, unfortunately. Now, when it comes to understanding another person, I think when we get out of our comfort bubble, especially like if you're traveling or whatnot, and actually just getting out of your comfort bubble, you start learning a lot more about the world we live in and the people that are in it. So one of the things is that I worked with some special ed kids, and sometimes there's always this belief in a textbook that like, oh, someone with like who's extremely autistic, high on the spectrum, that they're just all over the place, they can be violent and whatnot. I sat next to a kid and I worked with this kid for like almost a year who is autistic, high on the spectrum. It was the sweetest boy I've ever met. The reason that he kept acting out in classroom was because his teacher kept putting him down and didn't believe in him. His parents didn't want to accept him, so he had a lot of anger built up. So I think one of the things is definitely getting outside the bubble. We tend to find more about other people, but we also start accepting and trying to understand other people with empathy. And I think that's the key right there, is actually empathy itself, not compassion, but empathy. Any other questions?
Also, like, so what do you think is the actual problem? Is it in terms of diversity? Is it because, let's say, people are racist?
Yeah.
Because people stereotype, or is it because the people, the minorities in this case, doesn't believe in themselves? And the reason I say that is because there's a lot of people, like actually not in the room, but outside the room that are very talented. And I said, hey, why don't you give a talk? And they said, oh, no, I'm not ready. Like, what do you mean? You do this every day, do it. Oh, no, I'm not ready. And the reason they said it's not ready is because they have an accent and they don't believe in themselves. So sometimes I think the problem with diversity is, I guess I haven't found really the reason where it's coming from. So where's the problem coming from?
All right, so let me try to break it down into the three things. Okay, one, the lack of confidence is something that's actually been programmed in most people that are minorities and also in women as well. For example, when it comes to sending resumes, for a white male, they'll be like 60% might be like, oh yeah, I have that. I meet all that criteria, 60% of that criteria that is, and I'm going to apply. Women, we have to do over 110%, and that's the same for minorities, is because there's this lack of confidence, because I think it has a lot to do with society. I think it has a lot to do with maybe, seeing in movies, for example, not seeing someone who looks like you being able to achieve something is something that really holds one back, but it also makes them doubt the possibilities. I think of all the times where I hear about women that are trying to start a company, and I see them and I know that only 2% are going to be funded. And I just look at them and I'm worried, because the thing is, at the end of the day, is that they're still pushing, they're giving more than anything possible, and they're working their butt off, and then they don't get funds at all because of their own gender. And I see that even with minorities. Some will actually sit in the back of the classroom instead of being in the front of the classroom. And I think that's because, the lack of confidence, because we don't meet criteria that society has placed on us since a very young age.
The flip side of that, there are people out there that are confident about themselves.
Yeah.
The employers just won't pick them up. Like, they'll just overlook their resume.
Right.
And because
worth something. And if you feel like you're not worth something, try to find out why that is. Because I think at the end of the day is that when we start feeling like we're not worthy of something, I feel like that's a challenge. Look at it as a challenge where you're like, start remembering everyone who says you can't do this, you can't do that. Think of all the stereotypes placed on you, the biases placed on you, and use that as your fuel to be like, you know what? Fine. I'm going to prove you wrong. And by prove you wrong, I mean you're proving to yourself you're worthy at that point. And I feel like that's where the start starts. It has to happen within you. And unfortunately, we cannot change other people's opinions and thoughts, especially if it's very much ingrained, but at least we could share stories.
I also think there's also training for men or other people, you know, just, because I don't think that men are going to get ahead nowadays without supporting women. So
Yeah.
they have to get on board. All
Yeah,
the
no
signs
choice
are there.
You have no
Yeah.
choice. There's a huge shortage. You
It's
gotta
going
let
to
everyone
it's
in.
going to take a while. you know,
Yeah.
And just keep confident and have faith and keep moving forward.
It's crazy because I was in nonprofits for the longest time where it's like equal, like, you know, it's a lot more equal across like men and women. And then when I go to RSA and I look in the audience and I'm like, oh my God, there's like 3 women and I'm one of the third one. and then you're like, okay, please say not assistants. Please say not assistants. And it ends up both of them being assistants. You're like, oh man, but at least there's no line for the bathroom. And that's a good thing in some ways. But honestly, it's unfortunate, but you are right. There's a shortage approaching, and people are gonna push in now at this point. You can't say no anymore. Any other questions? All right. Well, thank you.
So I have a question.
Oh, wait, go.
I think it's something that can be discussed.
Sure. Go for it.
How do you deal with it? How do you deal with like the inequality and situations that you yourself have been put in, for example, in RSA?
Ooh, okay. So one, it didn't hit me that that's what I was dealing with because I was in nonprofit for a long time and then I suddenly went to cybersecurity.
10 years and then
And then what happened was when I went to RSA and I started seeing like there was no women here and it was all white men. I'll be honest. I remember going back to the hotel room, went straight to the bathroom, like, why do I feel like there's something wrong? Like I just don't feel right. And then I just broke down crying. And I think that's when it hit me. Something's wrong here. Literally, like I just sat there. It's like, and that was it. The tipping point was that was like in April, right? 2 months go in, and then suddenly I started thinking, like, do I want to leave this space because this is not good. I've been interviewing women. I've been interviewing minorities in this space, and it's not good at all. But something changed in me where I just kind of got to a point where some life things happen, and I was like, I gotta prove to myself I'm worthy of something. So I submitted a talk, and it was accepted. And my voice is cracking because I've gone over a flu, not crying. But yeah, so that was my tipping point. Was that moment? Was that somehow I needed to prove to myself that I'm worthy of something. And then I just kept going forward, and every time I felt like I needed to take a step back or anything like that, I would just throw myself even harder and keep going against the current. And now I'm very fortunate is that I built out a really good network because I kept pushing things, and that network has been supporting me more than ever before, and I help them too, but most importantly, it's helped me grow. And it's also given them the ability to see, you know, these issues that are around the area. Because it is men and women that are champions for women and for minorities as well. Any other questions? Before I lose my voice.
Great talk.
Day. So thank you guys. You guys are the troopers who made it till the end, and all those other guys are doing the squares. So we'll see you tomorrow. We'll have Chris Roberts tomorrow, which is the play hacker. You know, Chris by nature is very controversial, so I'm looking forward to his talk tomorrow. And we're going to keep running to capture the flag. And then we'll just have one room tomorrow. We're going to have the common area. So keep doing our log picking and stuff. And we should have hopefully, do you guys like it today?
Yeah.
That's great, right? That's awesome. That's awesome. I'm inclined to announce tomorrow that we're doing it again. So it always starts as soon as you finish. So I'll see you guys tomorrow. Have a good night.